So nice to be together now after Tisha B'Av. We're going to start with a quick review of what we did last time. And then basically last time we ran out of time for like comments and questions at the end. So we're going to start with a few minutes for people to respond. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen and do a run through of what we did last time. So whether you were there or not, hopefully that'll be helpful. And then, as I say, we'll make time for people to say anything they want to about what we did last time. So very nice to be with everyone again. Let's see, I'm just sharing my screen with you all. So this is what we started with last time, a few of these short teachings. First of all, if you believe that you can damage, believe you can fix, it's very, very helpful principle that, no matter how bad things seem, and no matter how bad the voice in our head is telling us we are actually, because in the Hasidic worldview, which is based on Kabbalah, it believes in reincarnation, and therefore we actually keep going round and round until we get it right. That although you might not be able to fix the specific thing here in this world that you damaged, eventually everything can be repaired on some level. And there's also a similar idea in the Zohar. It says teshuvah, which is returning to ourselves and returning to the divine, returning to our best selves, our highest selves. Teshuvah fixes everything, the Zohar says, above, below, and everywhere. So when we do the work we need to do, it has effects beyond what we can even sense. Number two, the famous teaching that's been made into a song, some of you may be familiar with, know that a person needs to pass over a very, very narrow bridge. And the most important thing is to not make ourselves afraid at all. The words of the song are normally to have no fear at all, but the Hebrew is actually shelo yitpached, not to make ourselves afraid. Three, we saw when a person cries out to the Blessed Eternal One, they're told to move on, as it is written, why are you crying out to me? Speak to the Israelites and let them move on. We talked about this balance, and some of you said some beautiful things about this, between prayer and activism, between doing things ourselves. And Rebbe Nachman was very strong on both. Prayer was absolutely central for him, but also he was very much about taking responsibility, taking things into our own hands and getting things done. So those were the three short intros. And then this one I'm going to summarize. We're not going to read through the whole thing. We spent quite a lot of time on this. This is a famous teaching called the Azamra Torah. Azamra means I will sing. It's one of the words in the quote from Psalms the teaching is based on. It's also, people also affectionately refer to the teaching as 282 or Reish Pei Bet in Hebrew, because that's the number, not the number teaching. As you can see there at the top, it's number 282, teaching 282 in the first volume of Likutei Moharan. And Likutei Moharan, as I mentioned last time, is really the only thing that Rebbe Nachman himself actually wrote of his teachings, volume 1, that is. Everything else we have about him and from him came through his main student, Rebbe Nachman, as we'll keep discussing together later in this class. But this he actually wrote himself. So no, you have to judge everyone favorably. This applies even to the worst people. Even if someone actually is a wicked person, whatever that means, we had a good discussion about that last time. Is there such a thing as a really wicked person? Well, he says even if someone really is wicked, we have to do the work of trying to see the good in them, find the good in them. And then he applies it to ourselves. And he says, this is really hard. He says, you might have to try really, really hard to find the good in yourself, because you might have a strong inner voice saying, I'm not so good. That thing I did, which seemed good, I was just doing it for egotistical reasons, for my own benefit, to impress someone, to get something. So I'm really not so good. He says, you've got to keep trying, keep digging, persist. And you have to find a nekuda tova, a good point, that little tiny place within you where there's actually some positive motivation, where you just want to give, be kind, be generous, do something good for yourself and the world. He says, if you can find that good point, you've got to focus on it. You've got to bring your attention to it. And it's very important. He tells us that we are responsible for our state of mind. He talks a lot about struggling with depression and how if we don't take matters into our own hands and focus on the positive in ourselves and in others, then we are vulnerable to negative thinking and negative feeling. And it's something, as we talked about last time, he himself definitely struggled with. We don't know exactly how, but we talked about various possibilities. But more important than what happened to him 200 years ago is what happens to us right now, right? And he's saying, if we focus on the negative or don't actively focus on the positive, we are making ourselves vulnerable to what he calls bitter and black despair. So focus on that good, on yourself and others. Again, even if it's hard, even if it doesn't seem like you did anything good or it wasn't really good, you just got to keep persisting. And he says the amazing radical claim he makes about this is when we do this work, it's not just that we claim that we change how we look at things, because that's, I think, and most of us would kind of see that as fairly obvious. Like, of course, if I do the hard work of changing how I see things, then that's one thing that happens. He says it's not only we change how we see things, we actually change who we are and who the other person is that we're looking at too, if we're doing this for someone else. We actually change somebody's existential reality just by looking at them differently. And we talked about how this relates to quantum science and how quantum says the observer actually does change reality. Yet having somebody in the room looking at something actually literally does change the status of something. It relates to an experiment called, well, actually it was a thought experiment originally called Schrodinger's cat, that Schrodinger originally came up with as a proof against quantum, and then quantum actually came along and showed him that it was right. Actually, Schrodinger's cat is real. That actually is how it works. So having observation, how we look at reality actually does change reality, and it applies for what's going on inside us. It applies for others, and he's telling us this, in the early 1800s, and he's saying in the final section of the teaching that when we do this, when we're connecting together the good points, the nekudot tovot inside ourselves, inside others, we're making music, and we're putting ourselves in tune with the music of life. Because he says music is going on all around us, and do we kind of live in the cacophony, the chaos of just whatever happens, or do we, God forbid, live in the bad music of bad thoughts and the bad notes of life, or do we try and select to place our attention? And remember, in Hebrew, to place our attention means, the way you say to pay attention in Hebrew is so beautiful. It's lasim lev, to place our heart. So do we place our heart and our consciousness on something good? If we do, every time we do that, it's like we're singing or we're resonating with a beautiful good note and a good spirit of life. He says that's how beautiful melodies are made. And he says somebody who does that, who can be in tune with the good points in themselves and in others, can be a leader of prayer. Because they can be an emissary of the community. They can be a messenger of the community, a shaliach tzibur in Hebrew. They can do the community's bidding, and that person then is worthy to represent them truly. So that's the journey he takes us on. We've got to work hard to see the good in ourselves and others. That puts us in tune with the music of life, and then we can represent the community in prayer. As my note says there, in caps, we got to hear. So let's come back together. And as I said, we'll make time now for people to comment and question on that, and then we'll move on. We have a few more related teachings to say. Anyone like to, I see the chat has a few things on already. So let's see. Yes, I echo the comment saying thank you, Julie, for what you do. Thank you, Julie. Right, yes, music and songs in general to Rebbe Nachman. We are going to talk about that in this class, Irene. That's the theme of this class. So as the title suggested, so we're coming more to that. Actually have something exciting to share about that soon. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Joan. Catherine, Lasim Lev. Yes, exactly. Oh, right, Catherine. So let me write it. In Hebrew, it's two words. So lasim, and then new word lev. And lev literally means heart, and it's used really from biblical Hebrew onwards, from the Bible onwards. It's used to mean consciousness, meaning people have thoughts in their lev. So a lev is, we might call it today our heart-mind, heart-mind. Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Joan. Does anyone have any comments or questions on anything we just reviewed, including anything you wanted to share at the end of last week's session, but then we ran out of time? You're very welcome to now if you'd like to. Otherwise, we'll move on. Just give folks a second. Great. Well, it looks like we're moving on. Oh, a couple of things. Lynn. Messianism, right? Yeah, we'll talk more about that for sure. If I'm not sure if we'll get to it this week, but certainly before the end of our mini series, we will. In Ruby, Rebbe Nachman on quantum physics. Yes. Actually, I have Ruby. If that's a special interest of yours, anyone else, I have a class about, it's called Quantum Teshuva. Anyone who wants to can reach out to me about that. I'd be happy to share my emails on the source sheet. So let's carry on, friends. I'm gonna share my screen again, and we can carry on down the sheet. We'll see some beautiful related teachings. So actually, you know what? Let me stop that share before I even go on to the next source. There's something related to melody. Actually, it's so beautiful. It's not on the sheet. Let me read this to you, and then we'll see what's next on the sheet. Because I think this provides a beautiful context for us. So there's a quote from the Tikkunei Zohar. The Tikkunei Zohar is an addition to the Zohar, probably written in roughly the 1500s, and to the Hasidim, there wasn't much difference to them between the Zohar and these other texts like Tikkunei Zohar that were added to it. So to them, it was, you know, a sacred text, a sacred mystical text, essentially. This is the teaching that this one I'm going to share now is based on. I can actually put it in the chat. It says in the Tikkunei Zohar, I'll just put it in the chat for you. The Torah was given to us with a tune, the Shekhinah with a tune, and the Jews will come out of Galus with a tune. Galus is Ashkenazic speak for exile, based on the Hebrew word galut. So again, the Torah was given to us with a tune. The Shekhinah was given to us with a tune. Shekhinah is the divine presence in this world, the feminine divine. And the Jews will come out of exile with a tune. So that's the quote from Tikkunei Zohar. And then, listen to this. In 1913, the folklorist Avram Rechman visited the small Breslov synagogue in Berdichev. So in the Ukraine, fairly close to the area where Rebbe Nachman started, where he was living and working. But 100 years later, there's a small Breslov synagogue that this folklorist visits. He records, while dancing, they sing and repeat dozens of times the words of the Zohar. The Torah was given to us with a tune. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, was given to us with a tune. And the Jews will come out of exile with a tune. In this way, in the darkness of the synagogue, Hasidim and their shadows danced in closed circles. So this recollection of this happening is one of many testimonies we have to the Breslovers being very passionate singers and dancers. And I saw someone asked on the chat, do we know any of his songs? So we have many, many songs from the Breslov tradition generally. I honestly don't know, Ellen, if we have any which we're sure that he himself wrote the melodies of. I haven't actually ever heard anybody attribute a melody directly to him. We have many, many Breslov melodies. Just to give an example, there's an Israeli musician called Yosef Karduna, and he released a whole album of Breslov Hanukkah songs. Just Hanukkah, only 8 days of the year, right? And you might think, how many songs can there be just about Hanukkah, just from the Breslovers? Well, he had enough to make an album. So it gives you an idea. There's a very, very rich library of tunes and melodies in the tradition. People appreciating the quantum physics thing. I appreciate that. I'm also excited about that. Why do we need to prove the existence of God? Doesn't that defeat the idea of faith? Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not really into trying to prove God. More just like, as science progresses, it's interesting that it actually seems to confirm more and more of often mystical ideas. It seems like science and mysticism seem to be coming to get closer and closer together as they progress. I wouldn't say the proof is what is important there. So let's carry on with the sheet. Now we have that teaching about the dancing and the singing in mind. Arthur Green, in his biography of Rebbe Nachman, Tormented Master, and this is direct quotes for anyone who's interested, this claim that the core of religion lay in the inner life of the individual and in the impassioned outpourings of its innermost thoughts before God is quite unique in the history of Judaism. So Arthur Green makes a big claim here that what was really new about Rebbe Nachman is its focus on him saying what's really most important is what's going on inside us and our inner relationship with God. And this practice, as he puts it, impassioned outpourings of our innermost thoughts. So Rebbe we're going to look now and see, this is a practice that Rabbi Nachman talks about a lot. It's called hitbodedut. And he really did give that word a different meaning. Literally, hitbodedut just means secluding oneself. But he said hitbodedut was this practice, which as we're going to see is talking to God, speaking to God in our own words. And let's see what Arthur Green says in this next quote. The therapeutic or redemptive technique Nachman taught was one born of his own experience in constant outcry to God from the midst of his struggles. So, they say necessity is the mother of invention. So he had a lot of motivation to pour his heart out to God. And we have testimony that he did that even from a very young age as a child, that he was constantly going off into nature and praying to God with great passion. And so when he became a Rebbe and people started saying to him, teach us what to do, this was one of the things he said. He said to people, if you want to be a Breslov Chassid, you want to follow this path, you have to do this every single day. You have to make time to speak to God in your own words and pour out your soul. And we're going to read now about the different things he said to do about it. So, Gute Moran, Volume 2. Remember, he didn't write it himself, but written by his closest student based on his teachings. Know that when a person prays in a field, every blade of grass enters into their prayer and helps them, giving strength to their prayer. So if you've ever prayed in nature, or ever just been in nature and felt yourself more connected to the divine, you'll probably resonate with that. It's just this feeling of harmony, of being at one with the world around us. And that if there is a creator, just being one with everything. The creator made everything, us and everything around us too. And he kind of personifies nature here and says, nature's like helping our prayer, like giving us force for our prayer. So he said it's best to do it, this practice of hitbodedut, of pouring our heart out to God and speaking to God in our own words. It's best to do it in nature, but that's not always going to be possible. Let's read more about what he said to do about it. Hitbodedut, speaking to the divine in our own words, is of the greatest value. Set aside an hour or more every day to meditate alone in a room or meadow and express your innermost thoughts and feelings and personal prayers to God. Use every kind of appeal and argument. Use words that will endear you to God and win his favor. Plead with God to draw you closer and let you serve him, and let you truly serve him. You should hold these conversations in whatever language you speak best, meaning Yiddish in our country. So obviously for us, that might not be Yiddish, but it depends on you. For in Hebrew, it is difficult to give expression to all one's innermost thoughts and feelings, and the heart is less drawn after the words because we are not so accustomed to the language. So indeed, as Arthur Green said in that quote we saw before, he's basically talking about using God as our therapist. He's saying, just speak, and let's carry on. You should tell God everything you feel, be it contrition and longing to repent over the past, or requests and supplications to come truly close to God from now on, and so on, each person according to their level. Okay, you might be thinking, but what if I can't? What if that just doesn't sound like I'm anywhere near being able to do that right now? So he says, if at times you find yourself unable to speak to God or even open your mouth, the very fact that you are there before him wanting and yearning to speak is very good in itself. You can even turn your inability to speak into a prayer. Cry out and beg for compassion before him. You are so distant that you cannot even speak. Ask him for mercy and compassion. He will open your mouth in his kindness so that you will be able to articulate what you need to say before him. This advice applies to everyone equally, from the very least to the very greatest. Everyone is capable of practicing it, can attain great levels. Happy are all who persist in it. It is also, and then he actually gives a whole nother practice here and then the last few lines. It is also good to turn Torah teachings into prayers. When you study or hear a teaching of a true tzaddik, make a prayer of it. So that's really, I feel like, should be a separate thing, but it's such good advice, it's worth just dwelling on for a minute. Anytime you ever hear a good teaching that resonates with you, why does it resonate with you? Why is it important to you? Why does it excite you? So turn it into a prayer, turn it into a conversation that you can have with the divine. Let's do a little bit more about hitbodedut, and then we'll come back together. I want to hear people's responses to this. If you cannot speak at all in your hitbodedut, even saying a single word is also beneficial. If you can only say one word, keep strong and repeat that word over and over again, countless times. Sounds like a mantra to me, right? He's saying, What if you're just really in a place where there's some kind of block or focus, right? And whatever's happening is you can't get past that one word. So just say that one word. You're saying it. You're doing the practice. You're doing that. Even if you spend day after day with that word alone, this in itself is very good. If you're strong and persistent and repeat that word countless times, God will have mercy and open your mouth. You'll be able to express yourself. The Rebbe also said, speech is very powerful. For isn't it possible for a whisper to prevent a gun from firing? Understand this. So just one example of how speech can have a much more powerful effect than we might imagine. The sound waves from our mouth really change reality. He also said that he wanted that the whole day be entirely hitbodedut for us, that we should spend the entire day on it. However, not everyone is capable of implementing this, and so he was forced to instruct people to practice hitbodedut at least some part of the day. This too is very good. So for him, it's really the ideal that we're actually just constantly in this conversation with God, whatever we're doing, whatever's going on. I want to add one thing that he didn't say explicitly, but he talks a lot about being stuck, not being able to speak, and so on. I want to say, for a lot of us, grew up in the world that we grew up in, we don't necessarily find it easy to relate to the idea of God at all, right? For some of us, maybe yes, some maybe no. Maybe some of us have been on a journey through times in our life where that was easier and less easy. I know for myself that's been the case. So I want to say, a very valid and important part of hitbodedut practice is to articulate that. It's to say well, this is weird. Who am I speaking to? I don't really believe in you. Or, okay, I used to believe in you. Okay, I sometimes believe in you. Or what does that even mean to believe? Who am I speaking to? Etc. I want to just legitimize that and say, even if you're in a place of feeling it's strange, it's funny, who am I speaking to, what this practice is, that's a very, very wonderful opening. And just like with any expressive practice, I'm also thinking, for example, of writing, like a journaling practice. A lot of the time people get stuck with not beginning. But once you get started, if you can just get the first few lines out, very often you can open the floodgates and you can just keep going. Now, it might not happen the first time you try, right? There is a certain a customization process, but if you can get to that point where the floodgates can open, it can be a very, very wonderful channel for expressing yourself, discovering yourself, getting to know yourself, and ultimately having a relationship with whatever we call the divine mystery. Let's come back together. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. Let's see. I'm going to go back up to where I see this begins. How can I hear the Breslov Tanaka album? If you search for Yosef, here, I'll write this in the chat. This is the name of the musician. He has a lot of wonderful songs, many of them actually Breslov songs. Yosef Karduna. If you search for his name, you'll find a lot of great stuff. And one of his things is a Tanaka album. It's on Spotify. It's great. I want to own that a few of the songs in the album are different melodies for the same, for Moat Sor, I think, but still there's a whole album full of stuff. It's great. So coming back to your comments and questions, Stephanie says, I love this practice. Me too. Ronnie says, oh, by the way, okay, so if anybody actually wants detailed practice instructions for hitbodedut, I have that written out already. Just email me with pleasure. I'll send it to you. With pleasure. I'd also it's on the Applied Jewish Spirituality website, I think, actually, also. So if you go there, you'll see it. Re Art Green comment in a life. Is this a precursor to Freud at all? Talking to God? Yeah, Ronnie, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I really think what's going on here is, I mentioned last time that Rebbe Nachman was writing at the same time as the Romantic poets were deepening the idea, our understanding of human psychology by a whole paradigm. And actually, it's funny, I mentioned it last time, and it just so happened that during the week, I came across some Wordsworth. It was in this book I didn't expect to see it in, and it was talking exactly about this. Wordsworth really did describe inner psychology to a deeper level than had ever been done before. And Rebbe Nachman is doing the same thing at the same time, obviously in a different context with different language. He just certainly didn't know about Wordsworth directly, but this is what's happening at that time. And then 100 years later, exactly, Freud comes along and creates a therapeutic technique based on that. It's kind of today sometimes academia takes a while to catch up with reality. So in a similar kind of way, the mystics and the poets are doing it, and then eventually it comes into the quasi-scientific, oh, it was science then, I guess, scientific realm. Beautiful, let's see. Thus, introspection brings a deeper connection to God. Exactly, beautiful, Anna. Right, Joan says, this is something that because of COVID, a lot of us might be more familiar with now. Now many of us have been forced to spend time alone. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Frana says, how did Rebbe Nachman teach that this was applied to busy women? Honestly, Frana, I have not seen him address that. I also want to own that he was speaking largely in his time to the people who were at liberty in his world to be his followers, which meant men mostly. Also, there are really wonderful stories about his mother and his daughter as well, if I remember rightly, and his aunt as well. I think women who he ascribed to be on the level of tzadkaniyot, of righteous people who had certain divine gifts and gifts of leadership and insight. So he certainly saw women having the potential of that. But I think it's fair to say in the society generally, women were more the enablers and the facilitators for the spiritual life of the men in an outward way. I think that's what the sociology was. Of course, I also want to mention, I think it's really important when people ask about that to say, this is one of the differences between Hasidism as it was 200 years ago and Neo-Hasidism as it can be today, wherever and whenever we are. Most of you are in the United States, I guess. I have some of you all over the world. I'm in Israel. And here and there, and wherever you are, Hasidism is undergoing a wonderful renaissance, revival, in lots of different forms, including Neo-Hasidism, which basically puts it in our hands, like in the relationship with gender, the relationship with the society around us. I consider myself a follower of Hasidic teachings, but I don't dress in the same way as a traditional Hasid or relate to gender in the same way. So, it's really about taking what we find valuable from it and living in relationship to it, but in a different context. And just to say, like, that journey of Neo-Hasidism actually started not only after World War II, but even before, so there were already people like putting energy and intention into this understanding that, wow, like these teachings have a lot to offer, but they need to be brought out of the shtetl, brought out of that world a little bit. Thank you for the question. It's great. It's very important. Sharon says, I always tell my grandchildren that no one could make nature's colors like God does. Beautiful, Sharon. Love that. Miss B. Mia Reed says, as Sharon asked, wasn't there many women in the family of the Baal Shem Tov that were strong at brotherly? Exactly, right. So thank you. Yeah, Miss B, that's exactly what I was just referring to. So Rebbe Nachman was from the family of the Baal Shem Tov, and there were these several women in his family. I said it. His mother, his aunt, I think also his daughter, who were ascribed this power of I don't know if prophecy is exactly the right word, but certainly some kind of prophetic gift, and people went to them for blessings and leadership and insight and so on. Lynn says, I somehow think the average woman, or at least married woman, did not have time for an hour of bodedut daily, and they didn't say, I think you're right, Lynn. I think exactly right. Anna says, what freedom, even without speech, is there a relationship with God? Much freedom with God. Beautiful, Anna. I've got a private message. Do we know if Buber was influenced by Rebbe Nachman? Yes, he certainly was. When Buber came along in the first part of the 20th century and really was one of the first people to bring Hasidic stories, and through that, eventually Hasidic teachings also came to academia and the world more widely. Rebbe Nachman was a big influence on how he saw things, certainly. So also his notion of the I thou, I think there's something there. I imagine people have written that actually. Anna, turning thoughts into conversation with God, thus many opportunities for connection. Exactly. So whatever's going up. So I want to really riff on what Anna wrote in that message, because a lot of us might think we should only pray in a certain kind of way. Like a lot of us might think prayer is only for when I feel a certain way, right? Like prayer is for when I am either brokenhearted or happy or calm or whatever it is. But like, as Anna says in that comment, actually, whatever's going on, if we can become aware of it, and this is really, like in any meditation practice, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, right now, this is what's going on. And maybe what's going on right now is like, I'm tearing my hair out and I'm really angry. And normally in that state, I wouldn't stop and like witness and notice that, right? Because normally I'd just get caught up in it. That's exactly the point. So whatever's going on, if I can just take a step back for 1 second and be like, oh, wait, this is what's happening. And then if I want to, I can choose to have a conversation with the divine mystery about it. And if I do that, then I'm doing this practice, and it can be very powerful. So thank you for that, Anna. Bonnie, saw wonderful YouTube on this technique that contrasts to prayer. The presentation stressed relationship, building relationship by sharing thoughts in the spirit of openness. I love that, Bonnie. Thank you. Yeah, because that's it. A bit like therapy. You know, therapy, as many of you may know, maybe much better than me. Therapy, I think, only works as deep as we let it go. You know, if I have a therapist, if I don't tell them, if I basically lie to my therapist and, you know, don't open up to them very deep, it's not really going to be very effective. So the more we keep opening up, you know, if I share something that's on my heart with my therapist or with a person or any person or with God, right, and I say, this is what's going on. And then if I have another thought like, okay, that last thing, you know, what's behind it? What's underneath it? Was that the whole truth? Is it more than that? And so on and so on and so on. If we keep going like that, it can be very, very rewarding. So yeah, that's exactly right, Bonnie. Alan says, how important is it to speak our conversation out loud? Ellen, thank you for asking that. According to Rebbe Nachman, and I think I must concur from my own experience, extremely. Because it's great to think. We all think all the time. It's very easy if we're only thinking to get lost in thought. And it's also very easy, yeah, to get distracted and for it to feel just like our regular life. When we're speaking out loud, there's a tremendous power and intention to that. We hear the words we're saying. That in itself creates a very powerful feedback loop. And we are putting energy into something that's going out into the world. And we have to take responsibility for that and own it, hear it, and respond to it. So very important to do it out loud. Thank you for asking. Joan says, Kabbalah is part of the vibrations of the universe, like string theory. We connect like that. Beautiful. I love that. Genesis says, God as a therapist, enriching thought, Bible journaling and art, songs written and instruments all played all for his glory. I'll add to that. There are lots of advantages to having God as your therapist. Available anytime, free of charge. And if you're in an urban environment, you can't get to the forest all the time, then something a lot of people do here in Israel is get on your phone and pretend you're speaking to a person. Nobody cares. Nobody's listening. Nobody's eavesdropping on you speaking on your phone. You can be speaking to God. No one has the slightest clue. So people do that all the time. Melissa, I like to write my prayers to God as I pray. So Melissa, thank you for sharing that. I mentioned this before. I want to say again in a different way. Journaling, writing is wonderful and amazing, and I really encourage it as well. And this is a different channel, and they both open us up in slightly different ways. So I'm not saying everybody has to do one or the other or both, but just know that with both of them, it's like you have to get over that initial hurdle of like, you know, what is anything going to come at all? And then once you do, it can be very, very rewarding. So just to say, they both kind of open us up from slightly different directions. Slightly different things will come with them. Elizabeth, can you write down the name for the meditation practice so we can learn it? Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to write down hitbodedut. As I said, please email me if you want practice instructions, or go to the Applied Jewish Spirituality website. I think it's under the resources section there. Melissa, that would be constant communication with God. Exactly. That's exactly it. That's what he's saying. That's the bottom Sephirot, right? Being present with what is. You're speaking and talking to God about what is happening. Exactly. That's it. So Miss Dimir is referring to the Kabbalistic tree of life and the idea that the bottom one of the Sephirot, the qualities, the divine qualities, is the divine manifesting in the world, which can be through speech or it can be through just life manifesting. And it's called Malchut or Shekhinah, the divine presence that we help to create. So thank you for that. Leah says, Rebbe Nachman said we should go out to a forest or field to pray. He said there is energy within our homes or offices. This energy affects us. Absolutely. So, you know, it's ideal if you can do it in nature, but not everybody can do that. And still, the practice can still be very well done wherever we are. It's only better to do it than not. Steve, just wondering if you could address the contradictions of Jews going to Ukraine, a country where so many Jews were slaughtered, including Uman, pray at a shrine of a rabbi who traveled to Israel and stayed for months and felt the trip was transformative. Also, what do you think Rabbi Nachman would think of the scene around his grave? and all that it attracts. Well, I need to show the herbal tea before I say that. No, I think, Steve, I haven't personally been to Uman, but I think it's just a testament to the power of his teachings that so many people feel drawn to do that. I do think there are a lot of issues about it. I do think there's a lot of things about it which are not ideal about the way it happens. And I want to say there are a lot of examples. In fact, it's hard to find not an example. It's hard to find the opposite of this, both in religion and in secular ideology and philosophy, where the original ideas go on a journey. People often take ideas and turn them into ideology and practices which do not exactly reflect what the original intentions of the founder were. Very easy to think of examples, and I say hard to think of opposites. So I think unfortunately that might be one manifestation of that. That's kind of what happens in the world with people's ideas. The book Everyday Holiness by Alan Moranis contains many of these ideas. Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that, Lynn. Yeah, I have that book somewhere. I'm sure it's wonderful. I have not yet read it. Ruby says, regarding just starting talking to God, even if you don't do day or whether it's certain frame of mind, as you mentioned, like tearing your hair out or if you're calm, etc., writing is the same and gives insight as well. If I feel I can't write, I start the poem with, I can't write. I have nothing to write about, whatever it is, and keep writing. You'll be amazed at what writes itself in the page. It's also really about divine inspiration. The ancients spoke about the muse, God. I really want to affirm that, Ruby. Exactly. And again, both with writing and with speaking, the important thing is just to open the channel, as I say, and just let it come, let it flow. Keep writing, keep talking, and eventually the floodgates will open. Kaya says, could you say more about neo-Hasidism and what forms it's taken in the United States? Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. So I think the main thing to say about it is the Jewish renewal movement, and the Jewish renewal movement is not a denomination. It was deliberately designed by its founder, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, to be what he called a virus that would infect the rest of the Jewish world in a positive way, not God forbid, negative virus. And that's what he successfully helped to create with many others. It has, I think, really radically transformed Jewish practice for Jews across many different denominations. And also, I would mention the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which combines Eastern meditative practices and Jewish ones, and is a home for a lot of those teachings too. I think that Jewish renewal. Julie mentioned at the beginning, I also teach for the Romamu Yeshiva, which is the Jewish Renewal Project. Unofficially, but it's very much influenced by it. These are the main kind of ways to connect with these things and find out more about them. And also, actually, most of the teachers who teach for applied Jewish spirituality are influenced by it as well. So you can also kind of, if you want to do a deeper dive, do that. Maybe the Chinese know something about what energy inside buildings with Feng Shui. Absolutely, definitely. Yeah, that's a wisdom, that sensitivity there. Frana, Sylvia, which is why we're taught that Moses' grave has always remained hidden. So we don't make Moses a god and pray to him. It was to keep us on track and praying to God only. Agreed, Sylvia. Certainly agree with that. Friends, thank you for those wonderful, wonderful comments, insights, questions. Really, I feel so blessed to be with all of your wonderful neshamas, your souls and your minds. It's great. So let's carry on. Let's do a little bit more. There's a lovely source I want to share on this sheet, and then we'll move on to the next sheet. So some of you may have heard this, some of you may have not. There's this beautiful song that Rebbe Nachman wrote the words to this in Likutei Moran, well, he said them and his student wrote them down. And then Naomi Shemer, who's like the songwriter laureate of Israel, she's like, she wrote Jerusalem of Gold and many other very famous Israeli songs. So she turned it into a beautiful Israeli folk song. So these are the words in English. Know that each and every shepherd has their own tune. Know that each and every grass has its own song. And from the song of the grasses, the tune of the shepherd is made. How beautiful and pleasant to hear their song. It's very good to pray among them and to serve Hashem in awe. And from the song of the grasses, the heart is filled and yearns. And when the heart is filled by song and yearns for the land of Israel, a great light is drawn forth and goes from the land's holiness unto it. And from the song of the grasses, the tune of the heart is made. So we're not going to do it in class because I want to keep seeing more teachings with you, but please, after class, please Google the song of the grasses, Nomi Shema. You'll see on the sheet also. I'll just quickly here, just put it in the chat so it's easy for people. And then, sorry, I'll stop showing my screen. And then you can listen to the song, and it's quite beautiful. So now we have another sheet to see. So I'm going to open that one and move on. Please keep your wonderful questions and comments coming, and we'll keep coming back together in between teachings. Share screen. Brilliant. Session 2. Here we go. So some of you may have heard that Rebbe Nachman was actually very famous for telling incredible stories which have been compared to the stories of Kafka, stories which have a very vivid, stirring, awakening prophecy. And this is what he himself said about his stories. The world says that stories are useful for putting one to sleep. But I say that through stories, people can be woken from their sleep. So that's how he used stories as the kind of equivalent to a Zen koan, like a riddle to wake people up from their sleep. This is a famous and wonderful one. Some of you may have heard it. The tainted grain. Once upon a time, the king said to his beloved assistant, "When I gaze at the stars, I see that anyone who will eat from all the grain, what that will grow this year, will become insane. Given the circumstances, what do you advise? How can we defend ourselves against this affliction?" So the grain, the crop, all the food that's going to grow this year is poison, and it's going to turn everybody mad. The assistant responded that they should set aside enough of the old grain for themselves so they would not need to eat from the tainted grain. Okay, so don't eat the new grain, eat the old grain. But the king replied, if we do that, and we are the only ones who will be, and we are the only ones who will not be insane, and everyone else will be insane. Then everything will be inverted, and we will be considered insane. So if we don't eat the new grain, but we eat the old grain, everyone else is going to have to eat the new grain because there isn't enough of the old grain for everyone else in the kingdom. So if we're the only ones who are sane because we didn't get poisoned into being crazy, then everyone's going to think that we're crazy because they're all crazy, but really they'll think that we are because we're the old ones out. Because mental states are really, defined by the society. Therefore, we definitely cannot abstain, and we need to eat from the new grain. But let's do this as well. Let's mark a sign on our foreheads so that we will know, whatever happens, that we are insane. If I look at your forehead, and also if you look at mine, we will know from the sign that we are insane. So, okay, we can't stay sane while everyone else goes crazy, because then they'll think we're crazy and they're sane. But let's make a mark on our heads so that hopefully when I see the mark on your head and you see the mark on my head, that will remind us, at least we'll know then that we're crazy because we ate the grain that made us crazy. Yeah, the story is like a riddle, as I said, and there's many different interpretations of it. So let's come back together. I'd love to hear questions or interpretations people have of it. Does anyone feel they have a take on it or they want to ask about it? Brilliant. I see someone shared some of the grasses. Thank you for sharing that link. Thank you, Darina, for that. Right. Lynn compares it to the Twilight Zone. I think a lot of his stories could be in the Twilight Zone. David, historical digression. Grain tainted by the deranging neurotoxins of ergo is a real danger, by the way, and has affected the outcome of important military conflicts as well as damaging many people at the time. David, I had no idea about that. Thank you so much. That actually is really good to know. Oh, thank you for Nancy mentioned Beckett. So that I've seen that connection made. People have said his stories have something about Samuel Beckett in them too. There's kind of like postmodern, like how do we know anything? Consciousness being relative kind of thing. Yeah, love that. Is there a link to the new handout? Yes, there is. Brilliant, Julie, to share it. Thank you, Julie. Okay, now let's get back to the story. Little Leah, sorry, I don't know which, says, how about eating the old grain and pretending to be insane? Brilliant. So let's think about that together. Let's talk that out. So Leah's saying they should have eaten the old grain, which wasn't contaminated, right? Then they wouldn't go crazy, but they should pretend to act like everyone else who is crazy. Okay, so I can see the merits of that. For whatever reason, they didn't. Maybe they felt that that would make them lonely, that would make them like the odd people out, right? Everyone else is acting in a certain way, really, and they're just pretending, and then they didn't want to be in that situation. Let's see. iPad 4 says how important self-awareness is. That certainly is, I think, a theme of the story. Lynn says, then they would not be authentic. Right, exactly. They would not be in community with everyone else. Brilliant. Brilliant. Anyone else want to offer a reading of the story, or like why didn't they do this, or like what if anyone would like to say, like, what do you think the story is trying to teach? Like what is it getting at? Like what's the message? And as I say, there are many different interpretations, so you don't have to get it right. Joan says, referring to the Jewish view of reincarnation, I feel like I would like a sign like that to find my loved ones when I return, or remind me of who I am. Beautiful. Oh, Joan, that's so deep, because I feel that's part of what the story is getting at, isn't it? Is like, really, like, who do we know who we are? Like, how many years? Many other people in this call have more life experience than me, but how long does it take us in our lives to find out who we really are, to connect with like our deepest self, right? So I feel that's such a deep theme with the story. Like, what's the mark? What's the sign that can lead us home, right? That can lead us ourselves. That's really beautifully put. Diane, why not prove that the new grain is not tainted? So let me think about that. Diane, I want to say to that, the new grain is tainted. So I don't really know what you mean by prove. Maybe you can write another comment and clarify that for me. I don't understand that. Stephen says, I'm not sure what the mark on the forehead is for. So Stephen, as I understand it, is so that when it's the two people, the king and his assistant, when they look at each other, they'll remember that something is wrong. They'll remember, aha, I'm crazy. Of course, will they really remember what that means? What does it mean to remember you're crazy, right? In a world where you've already gone crazy, will you even know what crazy means? If you are crazy, I say, so that these are all the questions that come up, right? You look at the sign and you see it, what will it even mean to you then in that situation? So I had not known there was a Jewish view on reincarnation. Lynn, there is, and to the mystics, to the Kabbalists, and to Rebbe Nachman, it was assumed. It was part of his worldview, and I'm happy to. We talked about it a bit last time. I'm happy to talk more about it offline, because we are running out of time this week a bit. But you can be in touch with me. I'll send you things on it. Laura, do not separate yourself from the community. Beautiful. So that's a teaching from the ethics of the fathers, from the Mishnah, from Pirkei Avot, right? So this story about that? Is it saying don't cut yourself off from the experience of everyone around you? So that's certainly one way of reading it. I like that. Leslie says this will keep cohesion of community. Beautiful. Same idea. Thank you, Leslie. Andrea says, like Alan Bates in King of Hearts. I'm afraid I don't know that one, but feel free to elaborate if you'd like to. Ellen says, a lot of loneliness and being the only ones with a different point of view. Right, exactly. So that's also the kind of like bit that's a bit like the work of Samuel Beckett and other kind of, and even Kafka, right? A little bit like, what does it mean to be in a world where like you see things differently to everyone else? And one of the ways of understanding the story is it's about the experience of being a Jew in the world, or maybe not just a Jew, maybe a Jew who's trying to be like spiritual, like so a Rebbe or a Tzaddik or a Chassid or whatever, right? And you can choose whichever category you want. Or maybe it's just about the experience of being a Jew in exile. You're surrounded by others who are different to you. Like you can play it however you want to in your life. I'm struggling with the story, says Miss Binia. It's like if I were today to descend into karma madness, I would not like myself. Right. So there's so many different thoughts about madness in the story, because it seems to be saying that madness is this socially defined thing, like it's kind of value neutral. But there's also the kind of like dangerous and negative aspect of mental unwellness too, right? So the story doesn't really deal with that and acknowledge that. It doesn't really go into that side of madness. Leah says, are we not all different than other people? Beautiful. We don't assimilate. I'm perfectly happy being me, a bold 70. I love that. So Leah, what I'm getting from your comment is this story is about the human condition. Doesn't matter, who you are. We all walk around being so different to everyone else around us all the time that we all experience some iteration of the story. I love that. Love it. Sabina, we need another to remind us who we are. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. Prana, also being known by each other. Beautiful put. Yeah, this is really good stuff. Ellen, also sanity is a social construct, right? So that's one of the things the story does seem to be saying. But of course, as we just said, there's maybe only so far that goes, because as I said, mental health also just has, a basic kind of wellness component too. Dorothy, that seems to be a lifetime learning experience, right? Like learning who we are in relation to others and so on. Frana, at least one other person to share the secret with. Yeah. Otherwise, if we're trapped in that existential loneliness, right? Like a character in a Samuel Beckett play, right? For those who are familiar, keep coming back to that, or a Kafka story again, then there's something lacking from life, right? In that existential state. Which, by the way, somebody asked about Buber earlier, and also I want to mention Levinas. These are people who later really developed these ideas into whole philosophies. Rebbe Nachman was expressing, way before. Sylvia, it's a lifelong process, finding ourselves and our relationship to Hashem. Beautiful. I love that. David, isn't the most ethical thing to do to pretend to be nuts, but remain competencies that could help protect everyone else as having themselves, as well as themselves, sorry. How is this different from finding oneself in a dementia ward? I love that, David. I think that's a great response and a great answer. It's interesting that I think your focus on ethics is not Rebbe Nachman's focus. I think you're very pragmatic, and you want to do the right thing for everyone else, which is great. And I think you might be right on an ethical level. I feel like Rebbe Nachman's focus is more about authenticity and finding our deeper self. And I think to him, that's a higher ethic. That's a higher value even than the kind of ethics that you're talking about, which is taking care of those around you. In fact, I want to say, Breslov has his teachings, the teachings of Breslov are often critiqued because they seem to really emphasize so much what's going on inside the individual at the expense of those around them, actually. So that's a theme that comes up in the conversation around Breslov. Chaya, is the story about adopting popular contemporary crazy ideas, even if untrue, if everyone else has adopted them? Oh, it could be, right? That's a great way of reading the story. If everyone else believes X, if everyone else is in a certain paradigm, or if everyone else is on social media, right? Do I have to be too? Right? Do I have to be in the same conversation as everyone else? Do I have to get sucked in? Some of you are shaking your head beautifully. I like that. I appreciate that. But if everyone else is looking at the world a certain way, do I have to do it too? If everyone else is talking about a certain TV show, do I have to do it too? Right? That's a great way of reading the story. I'm so happy now the floodgates have opened. Now I see there's another 30 messages I haven't read. This is great. I mean, I think the story deserves this kind of response. There's a lot to it. Leslie, the mark will remind them of their essential essence. Beautifully put, Leslie. I really resonate with that reading. Sharon, I'm still unsure about what the message is of the story. Sharon, you're in very good company. There's no one reading of the story. But all the different readings people are suggesting all have merit. My personal inclination is that it's a story about how lonely it is in the world if you can't find your deep self and share that with someone else. But there are so many aspects of that, and people are bringing out all these different sides of it here. Miss Binia says, if I were to join the current orthodoxy where everyone has to think the same and no dissent, I don't know that I would want to join that. Yeah, so brilliant. So is this a comment? Is this that you thought of that in the context of this story, right? So is the story about conformity in religion, in religious practice, right? Is it a story about how everyone seems to dress the same and act the same and pray the same and sing the same songs? Do I have to be just like everyone else? What if I have a different kind of relationship with God? What if I want to relate to God or Judaism in a different way? Beautiful. Drinking the Kool-Aid, exactly, Bonnie. It's a story about drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Exactly it. Lynn, King of Hearts, the sweet movie. Ruby, it's about not separating oneself from the kahal, the community, but also realizing the effects of exile on us and correcting with that. Thank you, Ruby. I appreciate that reading very much. Mr. said, yes, Pony, but I can't. I'd rather be alone and isolated and sane than trying to be like everyone else, right? So that's the balance, isn't it? Authenticity, right? Or connection with others. And hopefully we can find a way to have both, but it's often not easy, right? So that's part of it. David, movie King of Hearts is about a soldier in wartime who encounters a town deserted except for the inmates in the local asylum. The portrait of insanity is a kind of extended playfulness, very romanticized. Interesting. That does sound interesting. Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you, David. Jerry, there are 2 books by Rabbi Yonasan Gershom about those reincarnated but murdered in the Shoah. That is really interesting too. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing that. That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Lynn, it is romanticized, but that's what movies are if we want them to entertain, right? Nancy, I like the story of not keeping something good from others, but standing with them when there is a danger or threat facing the group. However, the solution might breed something new. Maybe this with the sign will in fact be more separated, or others will interpret the sign to mean something else. Right. This whole thing with the sign. Thank you so much for this, Nancy. The sign might not work, right? The sign is meant to remind them that they went crazy. At the same time, to allow them to be like everyone else, they ate the same grain as everyone else, but maybe it won't work because, as Nancy's saying, the sign might separate them from everyone else, and they might not even remember what the sign meant to mean in the first place. No matter what might happen, the key thing is loving others enough not to protect oneself only and leave others to a bad fate by themselves. I appreciate that very much, Nancy. Nancy, that reminds me of the saying some of you might have heard, which is, most of us have no idea what everyone else around us is dealing with. When you encounter someone, you might be someone you know very well, or it might be a complete stranger you're just like randomly encountering on the street or in a shop. You've no idea what they're struggling with in this moment. Like, God knows what's going on for them in this moment, this day. Like, who knows what news they just heard or what's going on inside them or whatever it is. And therefore, it's really important to be really compassionate in that way. And in some ways, the story introduces so much uncertainty, right? It points out that we don't really know who our deep self is, and we don't really know others deeply. And there's so many masks and veils between us and reality, and for us and everyone else around us, that maybe compassion is the best response. Maybe being really, really kind and giving ourselves and others the benefit of the doubt is a very valid response. We are running out of time, friends. So I'm gonna cherry pick the comments are going forward and for a few more minutes, and then we're going to run out of time completely. The issue shows up in a way in the resistance that deaf parents resist cochlear implants for their kids and themselves. That is a fascinating example. Thank you for that, David. Could it be looking in the mirror and at your self-reflection and at your ideal self? Right, Annette, thank you for that. So that's something the story is getting at, isn't it? Like, who are we? Is it, am I whatever I happen to see in the mirror? Am I my best possible self? Ellen, oh, that's the film. Brilliant, thank you for that recommendation. Be kind, says John. Brilliant, everyone. Our time is up. We got to the end.